We'll start with Dr. Davis. This comes from our audience today. Do you support reinstating a firm firewall between community banks and Wall Street investment banks? And if so, how?
Some of the problems that happened over the past, even the past couple of months with this bailout package is we got away from some of the sound principles. You know, I hear Senator Obama talk about a 21st century economy, and I'll get back to this, that we need to preserve some of the lessons that we learned in the 20th century with the Depression. Most banks, they have certain rules that concern how much they're able to leverage their capital. But there were 5 firms in Wall Street that were doing business with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac that were released from those rules. So what did they do? They immediately go up to 20 to 30 to 40 to 1 in leveraging. And what were they leveraging? They were leveraging false assets. These assets were home prices that were grossly inflated. We saw this. What happened in the 1990s, before the last 8 years, there's a lot of blame to go around, is the Clinton administration started suing and penalizing financial institutions if they weren't aggressive in placing these subprime mortgages. Now I know that if somebody wants to buy a $200,000 home, 20% down can sometimes be very, very hard to do. But that doesn't mean that you go from that all the way down to no income, no job, no assets, and give somebody a mortgage. And that's what happened. A lot of people were looking at real estate as an investment. Well, I'll get this piece of property and watch it increase by 50% and make a profit. That's not what the purpose of home ownership is. But underneath all of this, the goal of getting more people into homes as responsible citizens is a very worthy goal. But we need to readjust some of those rules. We need to really look at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and how we got to this position, and they need to be reformed, if not partially dismantled.
Your answer, Mr. Walz?
Well, first of all, again, I think we need to be very clear that community banks being used in the same sentence as investment banks is an abomination and absolutely a misnomer. There is no correlation between the two because of the rules that were followed out here, the capitalization in the banks that we have out here, and I would quite honestly say the personal responsibility that was taken by our community bankers. We are very lucky to live in a congressional district that's one of the top 10 in the nations for the ability of community bankers and the ability of capital. That's something to be very proud of. These banks are not just places where money's deposited and money's sent out. They're the cornerstones of our small community. We have seen an economic ideology that, again, went towards speculation, granted the personal responsibility on this. There's people that should have never taken a home loan. There's people that should have never given those loans. There's people that should have never sold them, and there's people that should have never bought them and repackaged them into this. But during that whole time, the one thing we can all agree upon is somebody should have been minding the store. Somebody should have been there to watch that the situation didn't infiltrate to bring down the entire economy. That's what we're talking about the government not being. And again, the football coach in me knows this. I don't want an outside player in the markets. I don't want the government as the player, but I darn sure want them as a referee. So on this one, what we need to do is we need to have responsible regulation, not over-regulation forced down onto our community banks. It's going to hurt at a time when we need to get that capital out. We need our local bank to be making loans, but we need to make sure this Wild West attitude that says Wall Street can do whatever they want and that the regulators were eviscerated, that's what's got to end.
30 seconds for rebuttal.
I agree with much of what Congressman Walz is saying here, but we should talk about this Wild West attitude. There were plenty on the conservative side of the spectrum over the past half dozen of years who were sounding the alarm. They were sounding the alarm and saying, this is going to collapse. We need to do something about it. Among those was Senator John McCain. He tried pushing a bill through and he was stopped. He was stopped by a Democratic senator from Connecticut. As I said, there's plenty of blame to go around, but in answering your question, do you need to separate investment banks from commercial banks? I think that we need to bring these investment banks back down to earth with the regulations that are more conservative.
Would you like to rebuttal again?
Well, I know now that, especially my opponent talks a lot about, well, I've been in Congress for 2 years. He gives me, at times, apparently the power of the president to be able to change all these. We have 3 branches of government. Republicans were fully in charge from 2000 to 2006. My opponent opened this by saying he got involved in politics in 2007, right after we were elected, and I know he did it within the first 2 weeks. What was happening the previous 6 years under the Bush administration? Why weren't you asking for these things to be done when you had full control and not a single veto was ever issued? So the rhetoric that happens versus the reality are quite divergent on this one.
All right. Our